Today, I am a man, declared the bar mitzvah boy and the rabbi. I know it's cliche, but from time to time, they really do say it. Today, I am a man. Interestingly, in my 25 years or so in the rabbinate, I can't seem to recall more than a few times, if ever, that a girl stood on the bimah and said, "Today I am a woman." What do boys believe about the meaning of that moment that girls see differently? Today, I am a man. Molded from boys to men by superhero comics, war movies, sports idols. For the longest time, boys on the cusp of manhood understood that, like it or not, agree with it or not, and let me be clear, like many men, I don't like it, and I didn't agree with it. But like or not, men, until recently, have long understood that to be a man meant repress your emotions, except for anger. Don't show weakness or fear. Never let anyone get the better of you. Always stand your ground. Demonstrate power and control. Be aggressive. Dominate the situation. Be a protector, be decisive, make money, be heterosexual. Don't be girly, don't be gay. Be tough and athletic and strong and fearless. Don't cry in baseball or hockey or anywhere else. Exhibit confidence no matter what. Don't ask for help. Don't ask for directions. Even if you're lost. Today, I am a man. What does that even mean anymore? Anthropologist David Gilmour, in his seminal work, Manhood in the Making, conducted a cross-cultural study of manliness around the world. And he found that almost in all societies, they had a concept of real and true and adult manhood that was seen as valuable and as an indispensable ideal. In the times of the Bible, manhood had to be earned and proved. You didn't declare it on your bar mitzvah. You earned it by proving and providing for your family and broader society, by protecting your tribe and others, by procreating. Today, all three of those goals seem less celebrated in our world. To some, they seem toxic. And to most men, they are out of reach if they were ever worth striving for in the first place. The lack of a clear path to manhood and a modern definition of manliness is causing an identity crisis among men, and men are lost and they are broken. And that's not good. It's not good for men. It's not good for those of us that care about them. It's not good for all of us who share this planet with them. When I say that men are lost and broken, I'm not just being euphemistic. Men are truly broken and we are losing them. I'm going to share some data with you, some statistics with you. But as with all statistics, we have to remember that each of these percentage points is a human being. A son, a father, a brother, a friend, a co-worker, a human being who happens to be male, who is lost and broken and in crisis. Try to think of the men in your life who are represented by these data points. Personalize them. Name them. If it's not you, it's someone you know. We need to see the problem facing men as a problem facing all of us, facing people we know and love. So let's start with education. Men account for 41% of university enrollments. That's down nearly 60 from nearly 60% in 1970, the year that I was born. If we talk about graduation rates, it gets even worse for men. Since men drop out at a faster clip than women, if the current trend continues, in the next 5 years, there will be 2 female university graduates for every 1 male. And as we celebrate the remarkable achievement that this indicates for women, and let's not fail to notice that. Let's also not fail to notice that fewer men going to university means fewer men on pathways to economic prosperity, and that has implications for their prospects of forming meaningful relationships and simply for feeling valued in society. Roughly 1/3 of men are either unemployed or out of the workforce. And already this has led to an epidemic of male loneliness and isolation. Men have fewer social ties than they used to. 75% of men say that they have less than 6 close friends. Can you count your close friends, men in the room? 15% of men have no close friendships at all. 30 years ago, the opposite was true. For the first time in 130 years, more young men ages 18 to 34 are living with their parents rather than with romantic partners. Men are twice as likely to overdose on drugs, 3.5 times more likely to commit suicide or die from deaths of despair, and 9 times more likely to be incarcerated. Now, I would joke, I'm not going to, but I would joke and say that maybe it's because all of those things sound better than living in your childhood bedroom as a grown-up at any gender identity. But we know it is nothing to joke about. These are not funny things. And they're probably, sadly, that's part of the truth. In addition to data, we're also going to need to learn some new vocabulary this evening. Not Hebrew or Aramaic, but the language of the manosphere, a collection of websites, blogs, and online forums promoting masculinity, misogyny, and opposition to feminism. Among the most active participants in this virtual but all too real world are men who call themselves incels, or involuntary celibates. These are young heterosexual men who blame women and society for their own inability to form romantic or sexual attachments. These men live their lives largely online, in online chat rooms where they immerse themselves in violent, misogynistic, and pornographic fantasies that far too often result in real-life violence against women and society in general. It will surprise no one in this room that recent studies reveal that more than 9 in 10 mass violent attackers were men, and more than 2/3 of them were men under the age of 35. Statistics are not just numbers, they're people. The most dangerous person in the world, according to all this data, is a lost, aggrieved, broke, and alone young male. And we are seeing more and more of them every single day. So to stand and to proclaim, "Today I am a man," should be heard by all of those who care about men and who care about boys as what it is, a cry for help. Though in truth, some hear it as a threat or as a warning. Now, I want to say a couple of things before I say anything more on this subject. I am well aware that when discussing any large group, we make certain generalizations that aren't true of everyone in that group. Not all men are in crisis, angry, scared, lonely, violent, or repressing their emotions. And still, the data says that many truly are. Second, I realize that in the fight for women's equality, we aren't done yet. That the gains for women are fragile, and if we focus on men, we might forget about women, let alone the non-binary and the trans community that is under assault and stigmatized at this very moment. It is a valid concern. And it is not a zero-sum game. I have 3 children. I love them each very, very much, and I love them each very, very differently, all at the same time. You have to do that. You have to do that. Third, when we talk about marginalized groups, we usually mean groups that mainstream society treats as if they are less valuable and therefore are undeserving of the same rights and opportunities as women, people of color, immigrants, LGBTQ+, and indigenous peoples. Part of marginalization is to view members of these groups in a one-dimensional way based on unflattering cultural stereotypes. It is true and it is accurate to say that boys and men are not discriminated against in the same way as these other groups are, unless they are also members of those groups. And still, a lot of young men feel that all masculinity is viewed as toxic, and that the problem with men is really being framed by this world, by society, by others, as a problem of men. What does it mean to be a man today? Is it a cry for help? Is it a threat? Is it a toxicity? Is it a blessing? That bar mitzvah boy who stands and declares, "Today I am a man," that university student who wonders, what does non-toxic masculinity look like? The father who is not the primary breadwinner nor the first nurturer of the children and wonders, what is my purpose? The lonely, angry, resentful incel who spends his nights and days raging against his loss of male privilege. Each of them, and all of us, need specific answers to the question, what does it mean to be a man today? Richard Reeves, the author of the best-selling book of Men and Boys, agrees. He says, what is needed today is a positive vision of masculinity that is compatible with gender equality. He says we must help men adapt to the dramatic changes of recent decades without asking them to stop being men. We need a pro-social masculinity, and we need it now. What does that look like? It looks Jewish. It looks Jewish. See, Judaism offers a model of masculinity that embraces imperfection, and we are all imperfect. We are not a finished product on our bar mitzvah day, nor the day that we graduate from university, or the day we stand beneath the chuppah, nor even on the day of our death, and certainly not, as we know, on this night of Kol Nidrei. We are not a finished product as we confess our sins and shortcomings. We are still becoming. We are still improving. We are still growing and learning and changing and repairing. In Judaism, to be a man means to always be working on yourself, to be better at all of the ways that we pray and confess about our shortcomings on this Yom Kippur. And of course, that is also true about being a woman or being trans or non-binary. We are all of us working on becoming the best versions of ourselves. That's what this Yom Kippur is about. But within the general category of human beings, there are specific things that men, because of our inclinations, because of eons of conditioning as protector, provider, warrior, leader, there are specific weaknesses and specific susceptibilities that men need to pay particular attention to. Just as there are specific things that other genders and identities need to be mindful of in their own lived experiences. But for men, where the left and the right offer men absolutes, be more like your sister, be more like your father, neither of which are particularly helpful. Judaism says to men, be more like our biblical role models, all of whom who were broken, all of whom who were flawed, and many of whom strived to be better. Be more like Jacob, who wrestles with his own personal demons and his moral failings, who literally and figuratively wrestles with God, from which he claims his name and gives us ours, Yisrael, the one, the people, the man who wrestles with God. Jacob, who in perhaps the greatest example of growth and self-awareness in the whole Torah, reconciles with his brother Esau. He hugs him, he kisses him in a display of true humility and brotherly love. And learn from the example of King David, who was as flawed and as toxic a male example as you could find in Torah. Sleeping with other people's wives, killing their husbands to cover up his actions, who uses force and power in the most egregious ways, But when confronted with his sins, when Natan says to him, Atahu ha'ish, you the man who did this, David confesses. Just as we have done this evening, he says, Al chet shechatani lefanecha, I have sinned before you, Adonai. David's a model for men, a model of how to avoid, we should avoid his toxicity, and we should emulate his accountability. David doesn't try to blame someone else or circumstance. He takes responsibility, and then as an act of tshuva, of repair, from his deathbed, he summons his son Solomon, and he says, V'chizakta v'hayita le'ish, strengthen yourself and become a man. David tells Solomon, I know that you are smart, but that won't help you unless you can apply it to the way that you act. Look at my life, he says to his son. Look at my life and how many mistakes that I have made, how much hurt I have caused. Don't be like me. Strengthen yourself. L'chizakta v'hayita. Become an ish. Become a man, an emotionally well-developed person. Only then, Solomon says, only then will your great wisdom, David says to Solomon, only then will your great wisdom be useful and serve you well. Follow the Torah. Let it be your guide, not your wanton desires, your crude impulses. And the rabbis of the Talmud, they build upon this. They explain, Ezahu Gibor, who is a man, who is a strong man, one who conquers his evil inclination. Better to be merciful than mighty, they say. That's strength. Better to have self-control than to conquer a city. That's a warrior. Self-restraint, in the view of the rabbis, is constructed as a masculine activity. It is macho, and it is an eternal struggle. Self-restraint is what it means to be a man. And consider the Machzor, this book that you're holding in your hands. Traditionally, these prayers and confessions that we just said, these sins that we read out, traditionally they were written to speak exclusively to male weakness and male transgressions. Now we read them as universally applicable, and we should, but they are also written for and about men and our David-like inclinations. In Hebrew, our yetzer. They are so hard, that is so hardwired into the male psyche that our tradition says individually and collectively, we need to confess these things year after year. Al chet shechatanu lefanecha. For these sins, our God, we ask forgiveness. Listen. For the ways that we have wronged you by giving in to our hostile impulses and the harm we have caused in your world through inflexibility and stubbornness. For the ways we have wronged you by losing self-control and the harm we have caused in your world through consumption of food and drink. For the ways we have wronged you through sexual immorality and the harm that we have caused in your world by hardening our hearts. For the ways that we have wronged you, O God, through greed and exploitation and the harm that we have caused in your world through dishonesty in business. Now, certainly, we can all be guilty of these sins, but again, in general, these are traits and transgressions that men must pay particular attention to. Doing them, acting in these toxic ways does not make you a man. We know that. Mastery over them does. That is the Jewish measure of manliness. But we can't do it alone. So men must break type. We must actually ask for directions. Throughout history, boys have been ushered into manhood and masculinity by stories, by examples, and the mentoring of other men. Just as women have been ushered into womanhood by other women. We see this powerful example maybe best of all in Anita Diamond's The Book, The Red Tent, one of the most important Jewish feminist texts of the 20th century. The core idea of Diamond's novel is to give voice to the often overlooked women in the Bible, particularly Dinah, the daughter of Jacob and Leah. The book, it reimagines the biblical story of Dinah and explores the lives and relationships and the experiences of the women in her family, focusing on their bonds, rituals, and the red tent, where they gather during menstruation and childbirth, It is a celebration of female solidarity, resilience, and the power of women's stories in a patriarchal society. And it is a model for men, a way through this male identity crisis. Our men's club does a wonderful job of programming and bringing men together for social and educational activities. Poker and pastrami night, the men's mingle. These are great programs, and they are widely popular. Other men from other synagogues befriend men in our synagogue just so they can come to our men's group programming. And still, this moment of male identity crisis, it requires more. Beyond the social, men must deal with the emotional. In small, intimate, and I just scared half the room, the half that I'm focusing this sermon on, in small, intimate circles of conversation and contemplation, our own red tents, if you would, Jewish men must come together to explore these questions. And our tents will be pitched right here, in the sanctuary and sanctity of this holy space, or in your living rooms, or if necessary, online via Zoom. Wherever men can gather, not for being, but for becoming. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav taught, nothing is as whole as a broken heart. To be a man in full is to acknowledge the breaks. I invite the men in our congregation to sign up for these self-led groups. I'll provide the resources, the conversation starters, and you'll bring your whole, honest, vulnerable, work-in-progress selves. And for teen boys and teen girls and those who identify as non-binary, in addition to our inclusive and expanding youth group, BBYO, Temple Sholom has begun working with an organization called Moving Traditions that is helping us design a spring retreat and follow-on programming to answer the question, what does it mean to be me? A question that every teen asks and ponders and needs an answer to. It's hard to be a man today. And in many ways, that's a good thing. Finally, men are being held to a higher standard, and we can live up to it. Even so, not all the changes that have led us to this moment are unequivocally positive. Left unaddressed, the current confusion of men and boys will have destructive social outcomes in the form of resentment and radicalization. We are seeing that already. Remember those statistics, the men and the boys that they represent. If not here in this room, then a son, a grandson, a child of a friend you know. This sermon is about men, but it is a message for all of us. Embracing our imperfection, becoming, not simply being, that is the mitzvah of this most sacred and challenging day. That's why we are here. That's why we fast. That's why we confess. That's why we beat our chests and reflect on change. We are perfect as we are, and we're a little broken too. Being perfectly imperfect is what makes us human beings in all of our many forms and identities. We are all works in progress, and it is steady work. Jacob reminds us it's a struggle. David reminds us it's never too late to start. And Solomon reminds us that we need to be both wise and moral. And the rabbis remind us that we must practice self-restraint of our yetzer, of our impulses. Yom Kippur teaches us that this work never ends, and Judaism tells us that we are created, B'Tselem Elohim, all of us, no matter how imperfect, no matter how male, in the image of God. I am a man. I am perfect as I am, and I'm a little broken too. And so are you, and so are we all. We need compassion for ourselves and for others, and empathy and understanding that being a man or being a woman or just being a human being of any identity in all of its forms, it ain't easy. It is hard work. I am a man. I am not defined by my flaws, and neither are you, but by our willingness to embrace them, to grow from them. We are works in progress And tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after, the work continues. Gamar Chatima Tova, may you be signed and sealed for good in the book of life.